and welcome to the channel here at Pennington Design Pottery. I am going to be making a video today that is going to be covering some of the terms that you hear in ceramics. And so I remember when starting out, it was like a foreign language. What are cones? What is vitrification? I have no idea what you're talking about. And it left me Googling things all the time. So hopefully in this video, it will be able to cover some basic terms in pottery. We're not going to go super into detail on some of them because some of these, you can make a whole separate video just on these terms. So this is just going to be a blanket overview for these terms, but will hopefully help you be able to understand the pottery world a little bit better, even if you're not a potter, but follow potters or are here on the channel a lot and don't know what I'm talking about all the time. This will hopefully help you out with that. So let's get started. All right, so first up seems basic, but the terms of pottery and ceramic. I have people that don't know which term they should use. Do you make ceramics? Do you make pottery? Yes. So these can be used pretty interchangeably. If you bought a mug at Target, that is a ceramic mug. If you have one of my handmade mugs, that is ceramic. Generally, pottery is referred to a handmade ceramic item, and generally used in the terms of wheel thrown. Ceramics is used a little bit more in the world of hand building, but in general, these two terms can be used interchangeably. And before we can make any pottery or ceramics, we need to wedge our clay. What is wedging? You've probably heard this term, and this is essentially kneading. Except for with when you knead dough, I believe that's more to not only incorporate the ingredients, but to induce air. We are wanting to do the opposite with wedging. We are expelling air pockets from the clay when we are wedging. So we're making sure not to bring the dough and clay up and over, but we're actually pushing down, expelling the air from the clay. So if you buy your pottery or your clay, bagged up, it's gone through a pug mill generally. And so it will already have the air bubbles removed from it. But if you either reclaim your clay or if you're measuring out your clay and you have to use several different lumps of clay, you're now introducing more air pockets. So you're going to want to make sure that you wedge that clay. So wedging is essentially a style of kneading that is expelling air pockets from your clay. So once you have thrown your piece, it started to dry, now you're going to hear the term leather hard. And this is slightly self-explanatory because it is quite the consistency of leather, but this is where most of the moisture has already left the clay body, but it is not to the point that it is completely dry and ready to go into the kiln. So this is generally heard when we're talking in regards to trimming pottery. So we want it at that leather hard stage where we're not gonna, touch it and it just flop over, but it's still soft enough that we can cut it with a knife easily. So leather hard is referring to the state of pottery and its point in the dryness. Next up would be greenware. And this is pottery that has not been fired yet. This is generally relating to completely dried pottery, so not leather hard. This is greenware, and it's very fragile. So I'm not going to break my yarn bowl, but I do have a few scraps here that I can show you with. It's still very brittle. So this has not been fired yet. It's not at that leather hard malleable state anymore. With leather hard, I would still be able to bend it. With this greenware, it snaps and crumbles, and it's probably at its most fragile state right now. So once we have taken our greenware and we have fired it, it is now bisqueware. And this is still porous, so it's going to be able to absorb our glazes that we adhere to it. But it is a lot more durable than it is at the greenware state. So I can't really push on this and it's not going to crumble. So it makes it a lot easier to work with. And there are some glazes that you can apply directly to greenware, but most of them are going to require that it be bisqueware. So bisqueware has been fired to a lower temperature, generally a cone 5 to a cone 6 if you're firing to, or excuse me, a cone 05 or a cone 06. I'm not sure what I said there. Need caffeine. It's hitting that point in the afternoon. But if you're firing to a cone 6, generally you're going to be bisquing your pottery to a cone 05 or a cone 06. And we will get to the cones in just one moment, so don't panic. Then, after we have glazed it and fired it again, we now have glazeware. And this is referring to finished pottery. It's been bisqued, it's been glazed, and fired again to the appropriate temperature. And for me, these ones were fired to a cone 5. And so now it is ready to use glazeware. Okay, calm down. We're getting to one of the larger terms here, which is cones. You hear this, and this is referring to the temperature of the kiln. And we use these witness cones, which are placed on the shelf when we're firing. And this is essentially our insurance policy. Though I have an electric kiln with a panel that tells me what temperature it gets to, there could be something wrong with the electrics, or there could be different hot spots in the kiln. So this helps me to determine what temperature it went to. So this is a cone 5, 6, and 7 that were fired together. So you can see them there. And these will melt at their given temperature. And so what is the cones? I have a handy little sheet here, and I will try to link it below. I believe it's from one of the colleges. And so I work with a stoneware that's a cone 6 stoneware. And when I bisque fire it, I fire it to 1,915 degrees, which is a cone 05. And then when I glaze fire it, I'm firing it to a cone 6, which is 2,232 degrees. So, and that's when we end up with this. So cones is referring to the temperature, and these little dandy witness cones. And yes, I know this is a very quick description of cones because it is still a very foreign thing when you're starting out to read these different temperatures, but this chart is helpful, and there are videos out there that go into more depth. But like I said, we're keeping this basic for the very beginners, or for those of you who just want to learn what we're talking about in this ceramic world. And so I'm not going too into detail, but there are videos out there that go into more details if you're looking for them. And in the world of hand building, you're going to hear the word slip a lot. And this is a watery clay, and you can make this yourself. I believe you can also buy it, but really there's no reason to. And this, you can just take the trimmings from your pottery, making sure it's the correct clay that you're going to be spreading it on. So if I'm using it for the stoneware, I want to make sure I use that same stoneware clay trimmings to make this slip. And we're going to be using this even not in hand building. Like for the mugs, I slip and score those. So scoring is referring to us scratching the surface, and then we would apply the slip, which is this watery clay, and I can show you this here. And this will essentially act as the glue. So it's kind of the consistency of a runny pancake syrup. And if you want to add a little bit more durability to it, you can put a square of toilet paper in it and then shake it up, and it will literally dissolve into it, and it's going to add a little bit more stability to it, and that makes paper slip. Here's another big one: vitrification or vitrified. You're going to hear this a lot when it comes to the terms of food safety, and the general definition of this is the process of clay materials bonding to create a non-porous surface. So this is still porous. This is our bisqueware. This is not vitrified. We can dip this in clay, or excuse me, glaze, and it's going to soak it up really quickly, and it's going to penetrate the surface of that bisqueware. And this has been vitrified. This, you could dip it in the glaze and it's not going to absorb it up. There are a few different ways that you can test the vitrification. One is by an absorption test. You can look for those on YouTube as well, and they go into detail on how to do that test. So I'm not going to cover it today. But when clay reaches the proper temperature, there are particles in it that are going to melt and bond together to create a semi-watertight surface, even without glaze on it. And there is a simpler test that you can do, which is to fill up your pottery with some water, set it on a piece of paper for about 24 hours, and then there should not be a ring. If there is a ring, your pottery is not vitrified. If there's no ring, you're good to go, and it is food safe. And again, don't come at me. This isn't a detailed food safety video. This is just giving you the general terms of these pottery terms, and in this case, vitrification. So if you want to learn more, there's lots of videos out there on YouTube, and I'm sure I'll do some in the future on the more in-depth details of vitrification and food safety. Now is something that you may hear when you go to purchase your clay, and that is grog. And these are granular materials that are added to wet clay. And so if you go to buy, say, a white stoneware, you might have the white stoneware and then the white stoneware with grog. And it's going to have little tiny gristly bits in your clay. It's generally not super nice to throw with because it does kind of eat up your hands a bit. So it's mostly used for hand building. But what it does is it helps with the structure of the clay. So it's going to hold up a little bit more. It's going to reduce the shrinkage rate a little bit, and as well as reduce the likelihood of cracks in your pottery. Here's another good one that we could go into a lot of detail on. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know a ton on because I only work with one of these. But this is oxidation and reduction. So this is pointing to the term of firing. I fire oxidation, which means there is oxygen present in the kiln when I am firing. Reduction pottery or reduction firing does not have oxygen present in the kiln when it is being fired. So that's the blanket term. Again, I'm not super familiar with reduction pottery because I don't do it. So I would love to someday to fire with reduction, but this is the general term. Next up is plasticity. So plasticity is referring to particles in the clay that allow your clay to stretch. So especially when we are throwing on the wheel, say I'm going to throw a bowl and I cone up my clay, I center it, I've pulled up the walls, and now I'm going to start shaping the outside into a bowl shape. If we have good plasticity, it's going to be nice and easy to stretch that clay out. If we don't have good plasticity in our clay, it's going to rip a lot easier. It may crack later on. So plasticity is that particle in the clay that allows it to stretch. We like plasticity. It's real good. We like it. Our last term that we're going to cover today is seconds. So if you've ever joined me at one of my farmers markets or street fairs, you've probably seen a bin at the front of my booth that has pottery seconds in it. And this is pottery that doesn't quite meet the standard, so it's still safe to use. There's not going to be chipping glaze off of it. It's still usable pottery, but there might be a small hairline fracture in the bottom from it drying too quickly, but it doesn't go all the way through, so it's still usable. It could be something that, the glazes just didn't turn out right. These are pottery seconds. So that is the term that we use when it's just kind of subpar pottery. So that is it for this video. I hope that these pottery terms will help you out when watching these videos, or if you're starting out in pottery. Hopefully this will give you just a little edge up to know what we're talking about. And like I said, some of these we could make whole separate videos, and there are whole separate videos on them because they're in-depth subjects like vitrification. And so we may cover some of those in the future, but for now, I hope this has been helpful and useful, and have a great day.